Good afternoon, one and all. So, this is going to be the first topic under the series of interpretation of statutes, which is the differentiation between the terms interpretation and construction. Interpretation को अच्छे से समझने के लिए we need to first understand what does this word interpretation actually mean, and also the other term which usually is used synonymously to the term interpretation, that is the term construction, and also the references between them. So without wasting a time, let's just start with the introductory part of this chapter. So for that we need to understand what is the basic objective that we are studying interpretation of statutes kinds of thing. Judiciary is sitting almost there to basically interpret various kind of statutes which comes as a point of question in various judgments which in various cases, and by interpreting various kind of statutes the judiciary delivers justice in an absolute manner. So as you can see over here that I have written that the term interpretation has been derived from the Latin term interpretari, which usually means is to explain, to expound, to understand, and also to translate. That is to say that interpretation is basically an act of discovering the true meaning. True meaning is the point which you really need to highlight or the underline. एज एन जब हम इंटरप्रिटेशन की बात करते हैं तो वहाँ पर सबसे इम्पॉर्टेंट जो क्वेश्चन होता है कि आखिर में जो स्टैट्यूट हम डिस्कस कर रहे हैं उसका लेजिस्लेटिव इंटेंट क्या है, यानी किस इंटेंशन के साथ वो पर्टिकुलर पीस ऑफ लेजिस्लेशन पिक्चर में लाया गया है. एंड दैट इज़ द रीज़न हियर आई हैव रिटन कि हम इंटरप्रिटेशन के द्वारा किसी भी स्टैट्यूट के अंदर इस्तेमाल हुई लैंग्वेज की एक्चुअल मीनिंग या ट्रू मीनिंग फाइंड आउट करते हैं. Or you can also say that interpretation is a correct understanding of law, which has been adopted by the courts for determining the exact intention of the legislator. See, the term which I have been talking about is the intention of the legislature, जो हमने अभी थोड़ी देर पहले ही बात करी कि इंटरप्रिटेशन का बेसिक ऑब्जेक्टिव ही यही होता है कि जो स्टैट्यूट इन क्वेश्चन है या जो इनैक्टमेंट इन क्वेश्चन है उसके पीछे की एक्चुअल लेजिस्लेटिव इंटेंट क्या थी, हमें वही पता करनी है. एंड द ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ द कोर्ट फॉर यूजिंग दिस पर्टिकुलर प्रोसेस ऑफ इंटरप्रिटेशन इज नॉट टू जस्ट रीड द प्रोविजन और नॉट टू जस्ट रीड द लॉ, but also apply it in a meaningful manner so that it may suit from case to case. So very conveniently we can say that interpretation is the primary function of a court, as the court interprets the legislature whenever a dispute comes before it. And also the prime concern of the court is to find out that what have been the intention of the legislature when this particular enactment or the piece of legislation came into the picture. But yes, we also need to keep in mind the fact that court is not expected to interpret arbitrarily and consequently. And consequently, certain principles have been evolved out of the continuous exercise by the court, which may sometimes be called as the rules of interpretation, and also certain basic principles of the interpretation. And along with the rules which have been applied by the judiciary, there are certain process or the certain tools which have been employed by the judiciary time and again to to reach the conclusion or to actually find out the real intention of the legislature. And in the name of tools, we can say that they seek help from some internal or external aids to interpretation, or also they apply certain primary or secondary rules of interpretation. So you need to keep in mind this internal or external aids to interpretation in your mind, because later in the later part of this series, lecture series, we are also going to talk about the internal aids to interpretation and the external aids to interpretation. Now let's just talk about what does this term construction of a statute means. We have already seen what is the objective of interpretation, what is the actual meaning of it, and how does this process of interpretation actually works. But let's just see, what does this construction of a statute mean? So usually the authors of various books or the authorities have tried to define this term construction as the process by which the court assign the meaning to the ambiguous provision which is beyond the letter of law for the purpose to resolve the inconsistency. So now you might ask a question that in both the processes, that is interpretation and construction, हम एक इनकन्सिस्टेंसी को रिजॉल्व करने की बात कर रहे हैं, तो फिर इसमें डिफरेंस क्या है? तो यहाँ पर आप एक फ्रेज देख रहे हैं, दैट इज गोइंग बियॉन्ड द लेटर ऑफ लॉ, यानी कि जो शब्द उसमें लिखे हुए हैं, जो लैंग्वेज उसमें लिखी हुई है, हम उसके बियॉन्ड जाके लेजिस्लेटिव इंटेंट को जब फाइंड आउट करने की बात करते हैं, तो वो प्रोसेस कहलाता है कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ स्टैट्यूट्स का प्रोसेस. बट येस, whenever we talk about the construction of statutes, we also need to keep a notable point in our mind, that the meaning we are going to strive for through the process of construction, that should be within the ambit of the objective of a statute, and it could not directly be explained by the statute. And that is the only reason we do not resort to the process of interpretation, rather we adhere to the process of construction. Now let's just quickly take a look over the differences, the points of differences that these terms interpretation and constructions are having. तो यूजुअली वी कैन से कि ये दोनों ही टर्म्स सिनोनिमसली यूज़ किए जाते हैं, बट यू नीड टू कीप इन माइंड दिस फैक्ट दैट दे बोथ आर jurisprudentially very very different from each other. So now let's just see how they are different from each other. तो इंटरप्रिटेशन के द्वारा हम पता करते हैं कि जो इनैक्टमेंट में लिखे हुए शब्द हैं उनके ऊपर नेचुरल और ऑर्डिनरी मीनिंग को अप्लाई करते हुए हम पता करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि व्हाट वाज द ट्रू लेजिस्लेटिव इंटेंट. Whereas in the case of construction, we try to draw conclusions on the basis of the true spirit of the enactment,